The Cretosians were a species that defined the very essence of domination. Born in the crucible of a planet where only the strongest survived, their evolution shaped them into the galaxy's ultimate warriors. Physically towering over most known species, with strength that could crush metal with their bare hands, they carried themselves with an air of superiority wherever they went. Their skin was a hard, silver-blue exoskeleton, evolved for battle. Their eyes, a piercing white, radiated cold detachment. They believed in a singular truth: only the strong deserved to rule. Over the centuries, the Cretosians had marched across galaxies, leaving a trail of subjugated planets and broken civilizations. No species had ever posed a true threat to their dominance. Their military might, bolstered by unparalleled technology and relentless discipline, was unmatched. Their fleets were vast, their weapons capable of reducing entire planets to dust. They lived for war, feeding off conquest as though it were the very air they breathed. Their philosophy was simple: if a species could not defend itself, it deserved to be wiped out or enslaved. Their reputation as the strongest species in the universe was not simply a boast but a proven reality. Entire sectors had fallen without a single Cretosian casualty. They were bred for war, their entire culture centered around perfecting the art of destruction. To them, war was not just survival, it was sport. Every new civilization they encountered was a fresh challenge, a test of their strength. But for centuries, they had grown bored. No one had posed a true challenge to their might. Until they found Earth. To the Cretosians, humanity seemed insignificant. They were a species from a distant, isolated corner of the galaxy. They lacked the advanced interstellar technology that other species had. Their ships were primitive, their weapons outdated. Cretosian scouts had observed Earth from a distance, and what they saw amused them. Humanity's reliance on outdated projectile weapons and their fragile, short-lived bodies seemed laughable. They did not have the towering physical presence or strength that the Cretosians admired in themselves. Nor did they possess the technological marvels of the other civilizations the Cretosians had crushed. What the Cretosians couldn't grasp was the complexity of human resilience and adaptability. From their point of view, humans were weak, fragile creatures who had managed to survive only because no superior species had come to claim their planet. To the Cretosians, this war was not even a contest, it was simply a way to pass the time, a chance to remind the galaxy who its true rulers were. They believed that humanity would crumble at the first sign of their fleet. They did not care to understand humanity's intricate history of warfare or their capacity to turn the tide when all hope seemed lost. The Cretosian High Council, in their arrogance, decided that humanity would be their next conquest. It wasn't because Earth posed any real threat, but because the Cretosians needed to prove, yet again, that they were the strongest. It was a decision made out of boredom more than necessity. The Council dispatched one of their mightiest fleets, led by their supreme warlord, Zarek, a Cretosian general who had never known defeat. As their armada descended upon Earth's solar system, the Cretosians sent out a planet-wide broadcast. Their message was simple. They gave humanity a choice: submit to their rule, or be annihilated. The broadcast, sent in multiple languages, echoed across the planet, cutting through every frequency. It was a declaration of war, but to the Cretosians, it was more of an ultimatum. They fully expected Earth to surrender without resistance. In their message, they made it clear how little they thought of humanity. They spoke of their own glorious conquests, of how every species that had ever stood against them had been destroyed. They described themselves as the rightful rulers of the galaxy, claiming that resistance was futile. They taunted humanity, saying that their weapons were no match for Cretosian technology. The transmission dripped with arrogance and scorn. To the Cretosians, this was not war, it was a lesson in dominance. Zarek himself appeared on screens across the planet. His voice, deep and booming, spoke of mercy for those who submitted and total destruction for those who resisted. He offered Earth a day to make their decision, convinced that they would surrender long before the deadline. To the Cretosians, this war would be nothing more than another notch in their belt. The humans, they believed, would never be able to withstand the power of the greatest species in the universe. But while the Cretosians waited for humanity's inevitable surrender, Earth's leaders were already formulating a response. They knew that a direct confrontation would be suicidal. They had seen the Cretosians' fleets, understood their technological superiority, and grasped the sheer force they were up against. Yet they did not panic. Humanity had faced existential threats before, though none as daunting as this. But this time, instead of responding with fear, they decided to lean on what they knew best: history. The Cretosians had underestimated humanity's greatest asset: their ability to adapt, learn, and strategize in ways that their enemies never expected. What the Cretosians saw as weakness was, in fact, a form of resilience that had allowed humans to survive millennia of conflict. Earth would not fight with brute force. Instead, they would teach the Cretosians something they had never considered: that wars are not won solely by strength or advanced weapons. Wars are won through strategy, endurance, and most importantly, understanding one's opponent. As the Cretosian fleet hovered above Earth, waiting for humanity's response, the seeds of their defeat had already been sown. They had come seeking war, but what they were about to receive was something far more devastating: a lesson in history. In the face of the Cretosians' declaration of war, humanity did not respond with panic or brute force. Instead, Earth's leadership made a calculated decision to use the Cretosians' arrogance against them. Rather than directly engaging in combat, humanity's military and scientific leaders gathered, formulating a response that would demonstrate the true depth of human resilience. They knew that fighting the Cretosians head-on would be a losing battle. The strength gap between the two species was undeniable. But humanity had always excelled in using intelligence, adaptation, and history to overcome impossible odds. Earth's response came not in the form of military mobilization but in the shape of a message, a comprehensive lesson in warfare and survival. This was not a threat, it was a testament to humanity's legacy. The message began with a simple statement: "You think strength alone wins wars? Let us show you otherwise." Attached to this declaration was a historical record, one that spanned thousands of years of human conflict, ingenuity, and triumph over adversity. The message was clear. Humanity had faced extinction before, whether from nature, their own kind, or external threats, and had always emerged stronger. The humans detailed their most defining battles, moments when they had stood against overwhelming odds and still managed to survive. They weren't boasting about victories but illustrating the key to their survival: adaptability and strategy. The history lesson was designed to reveal to the Cretosians that wars are not simply about who has the bigger army or more advanced weapons. They are about endurance, wit, and the ability to learn from past conflicts. The message then delved into humanity's rich military history. One of the first examples was the Battle of Thermopylae. The Cretosians, it was explained, might view this ancient battle as a loss, given that the Spartans were ultimately defeated. But the lesson wasn't in the outcome, it was in the spirit of resistance. A small, well-prepared force had managed to hold off a vastly superior army through clever tactics and an intimate understanding of the terrain. The Cretosians were reminded that size and numbers don't guarantee victory. Next came the strategies of Genghis Khan, whose use of psychological warfare and unpredictability had allowed him to conquer vast regions with fewer resources. The Mongols had turned warfare into an art form, utilizing speed, mobility, and fear to dominate enemies far greater in number. The humans emphasized how Khan's tactics were rooted in understanding his enemy's weaknesses, using those vulnerabilities to create chaos and force submission. These were lessons that transcended time, showing that power without strategy is often a path to ruin. The message continued with more modern examples, showcasing World War II and the resilience of nations that had faced near destruction. From the resistance of the British during the Blitz to the unyielding defense of Stalingrad by the Soviets, humanity had faced down enemies that seemed unstoppable. And yet, through sheer willpower, adaptability, and strategy, they had survived. These historical examples weren't just random stories. They were chosen specifically to illustrate that humanity had never won wars by brute force alone. Instead, humans excelled at reading their enemy, understanding their weaknesses, and outmaneuvering them in ways that brute strength could not counter. For the Cretosians, who had never lost a battle and relied heavily on their overwhelming force, these examples of human history seemed irrelevant. They saw humanity's reliance on strategy and endurance as a weakness rather than a strength. To them, the lesson presented by Earth was a feeble attempt to avoid the inevitable. They laughed off the humans' message, confident that no history lesson could change the outcome of the war they were preparing to wage. Zarek, the Cretosian general leading the fleet, personally addressed his troops, mocking humanity's reliance on their past. He dismissed their examples as the actions of a desperate species clinging to outdated tactics. In his mind, the Cretosians had transcended such primitive methods. Their technology and strength were all that mattered. Victory was assured, he proclaimed. The Cretosians had seen this countless times, species that believed they could outthink the inevitable, only to be crushed beneath the Cretosians' might. Yet, within the Cretosian ranks, there were those who began to question their leader's arrogance. Some of the more analytical minds within the Cretosian command couldn't entirely dismiss the human message. These individuals recognized the strategic genius behind humanity's examples. They knew that strength alone was not always enough, and that history was littered with powerful forces that had been brought to their knees by weaker but more cunning opponents. Doubt began to flicker, even if briefly, in the minds of these Cretosians. They understood the underlying message that the humans had conveyed: this would not be a straightforward war. The Cretosians might be the strongest species in the universe, but humans had spent millennia fighting wars, adapting, and learning from every conflict. The humans had made it clear, they were not simply another species to be crushed underfoot. They had faced extinction before and survived through intelligence and tenacity. But despite these doubts, the overall consensus among the Cretosians remained the same. They were too proud, too convinced of their own superiority to take the human lesson seriously. They believed that no amount of historical knowledge or strategic thinking could alter the outcome of the war they were about to start. For them, this was just another species to conquer, another battle to win. They viewed the humans' message as nothing more than the ramblings of a species trying to delay the inevitable. As the Cretosians prepared for war, they couldn't comprehend that humanity was not fighting in the same way they were accustomed to. This was not a contest of brute force, it was a contest of will, intellect, and endurance. The seeds of doubt that had been planted were small, but they would grow, especially as the Cretosians began to realize that humanity's approach to war was unlike anything they had faced before. The history lesson was not just about the past. It was a warning about the future. With the Cretosians' fleet hovering ominously above Earth, humanity's leaders knew that they had no chance of winning a direct confrontation. The Cretosians were too strong, their technology too advanced. But humanity had faced seemingly invincible enemies before, and they understood that the key to survival wasn't always about fighting on the enemy's terms. Instead of amassing vast armies to challenge the Cretosians head-on, Earth's military strategists and scientists began devising a plan that would rely on unconventional warfare, a method that had worked time and time again in human history. The first step was to disrupt the Cretosians' technological superiority. Earth's military forces began by identifying vulnerabilities in the Cretosians' systems. Hackers, engineers, and scientists worked around the clock to exploit weaknesses in the alien fleet's communications and power systems. They knew they couldn't overpower the Cretosians with brute force, so they focused on undermining their technological infrastructure. Sabotage became a key weapon in their arsenal. As the Cretosians prepared for what they thought would be a swift and overwhelming assault, human forces laid traps and created diversions that played to Earth's natural strengths. Earth's terrain, familiar to its inhabitants but alien to the Cretosians, was used as a weapon. Dense forests, mountain ranges, and urban environments were turned into strategic choke points. Mines were planted in areas where the Cretosians would least expect them. Electronic warfare units created false signals, luring Cretosian troops into ambushes. It was an intricate web of traps designed to frustrate and confuse an enemy that was used to clear and decisive victories. What followed in the first skirmishes was a showcase of humanity's creativity in the face of overwhelming odds. The Cretosians, expecting a straightforward battle, were met with guerrilla tactics that they had never encountered before. Small human units struck Kratosian patrols from the shadows, using hit-and-run tactics. These weren't massive, organized military operations but small, nimble teams who knew the terrain and could disappear into it as quickly as they appeared. Human forces took advantage of the Kratosians' reliance on their advanced technology. When Kratosian ground troops moved into an area, they found their communications jammed, their navigation systems scrambled, and their weapons systems malfunctioning. This left them vulnerable to ambushes by human soldiers armed with makeshift weapons, explosives crafted from repurposed materials, EMP devices that disabled their shields, and even basic ballistic weapons that, when aimed at the right places, proved unexpectedly effective against Kratosian armor. At first, the Kratosians couldn't comprehend what was happening. Their armies were used to overpowering their opponents with superior firepower and numbers. But here they were, losing soldiers to small, disorganized groups of humans who seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappear just as quickly. What frustrated them even more was that the humans weren't engaging in traditional warfare. They weren't marching out to meet the Kratosians in open battle, but instead, they used the environment to their advantage, attacking supply lines, disabling crucial infrastructure, and striking when the Kratosians least expected it. The Kratosians' war doctrine had been built around overwhelming force. They had no experience with this type of warfare, where the battlefield was the entire planet, and the enemy was nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The first battles left the Kratosian commanders frustrated and humiliated. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. But even as they attempted to adapt, humanity continued to stay one step ahead. Psychological warfare soon became one of humanity's most effective weapons. Knowing that the Kratosians were prideful and viewed themselves as unbeatable, human strategists began to exploit this arrogance. They fed the Kratosians false information, making them believe that key human leaders or installations were in specific locations, only for those areas to turn out to be decoys, leading to devastating Kratosian losses. Misinformation was spread throughout the Kratosian ranks, creating confusion and paranoia. Humans also began using hit-and-run tactics that struck at the Kratosian sense of control. Raids on Kratosian camps in the dead of night, where small teams of human commandos would disable ships, steal supplies, or plant explosives, made the Kratosians feel unsafe even within their own ranks. The Kratosians had expected an easy, quick victory. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that was elusive, cunning, and seemingly always one step ahead. As these tactics continued, cracks began to form in the Kratosians' morale. The humans, who they had believed would be a weak and easily conquered species, were now making them look foolish. Their advanced technology and superior physical strength were being rendered useless by an enemy who refused to fight by the rules they were used to. This wasn't the glorious conquest the Kratosians had expected. It was turning into a drawn-out, humiliating campaign that was damaging not just their forces but their pride. The psychological toll on the Kratosians grew with each skirmish. They began to question their leadership and the invincibility they had always believed in. Every time they thought they had the humans cornered, the situation would flip, and they would find themselves outmaneuvered. Some Kratosians started to wonder if they had made a grave mistake by underestimating humanity. Their confidence was shaken, and the seeds of doubt planted earlier began to sprout. For humanity, these unconventional tactics weren't just about survival. They were about proving a point. The Kratosians had come to Earth believing that strength alone would decide the outcome. Humanity showed them that wars were about more than brute force. They were about strategy, creativity, and understanding your enemy. The Kratosians may have had the technological edge, but humans had turned the very weaknesses the Kratosians overlooked into their greatest strengths. The tide of the war was turning, not through massive battles or overwhelming victories but through a series of small, seemingly insignificant actions that, when combined, began to unravel the Kratosian war machine. Humanity had drawn from its rich history of conflict, from ancient guerrilla tactics to modern psychological operations, to bring an unstoppable enemy to its knees. The Kratosians had wanted war. What they got instead was a masterclass in unconventional warfare, one that they had never anticipated, and one they were not prepared to counter. The Kratosians, no longer content to toy with humanity, decided that the time had come to end the conflict once and for all. Humiliated by the repeated defeats and unexpected setbacks they had suffered at the hands of what they believed to be a weak species, they prepared for an all-out assault on Earth. Their goal was simple: to overwhelm humanity with their full might and crush any remaining resistance in a single, decisive blow. They believed that their brute strength, combined with their advanced technology, would finally deliver the victory they had been expecting from the start. Their armada descended upon Earth in a wave of fury, their ships blanketing the skies and their troops ready to rain destruction. But as they prepared to launch their attack, they found something unexpected. The humans were not waiting for them in large formations or prepared for a grand, final confrontation. Instead, Earth's defense forces had seemingly vanished from the Cretosians' sensors. There were no clear targets, no grand battles to be had. For a moment, the Cretosians hesitated, unsure of where to strike. Humanity, knowing that they could not match the Cretosians in open warfare, had prepared a trap. Drawing from their extensive knowledge of historical warfare, they devised a plan that would combine every lesson they had learned from centuries of conflict. The Cretosians' size and strength made them overconfident, and that arrogance became their undoing. Earth's defense forces had set up a series of coordinated attacks, sabotage, and diversions that would lure the Cretosians into a deadly game. As the Cretosians began to push forward, they encountered seemingly abandoned cities and empty military bases, all wired with explosives and sabotage devices. Infrastructure they had come to rely on for support, communication towers, energy grids, began to fail. Their ships started experiencing malfunctions, and supply lines were cut. Small, fast-moving human teams infiltrated their ranks, planting traps and disrupting operations. The Cretosians, unable to trust their own systems, were forced into chaotic disarray. Their advanced technology, once their greatest asset, now became a liability as it was methodically sabotaged. The Cretosian forces, used to overwhelming their enemies quickly, now found themselves struggling against an opponent that refused to fight on their terms. Guerrilla tactics, precision strikes, and psychological warfare continued to unravel their once impenetrable ranks. They had prepared for an all-out battle of strength, but what they encountered was a battle of wits, one they were ill-equipped to win. As the Cretosian armada floundered in the chaos, their leader Zarek watched from the command center of his flagship. It was there, in the midst of the confusion and destruction, that the realization finally dawned on him. For all their strength, all their technological superiority, the Cretosians had fundamentally misunderstood what it took to win a war. They had come to Earth expecting to face an inferior species, but instead, they had been outmaneuvered at every turn. Zarek, who had once scoffed at the human history lesson, now saw its true significance. Humanity had not survived for millennia through strength alone. They had endured through adaptability, resilience, and the ability to learn from their mistakes. The humans had fought wars far longer than the Cretosians had existed as a species, and every battle, every loss, had taught them something. The Cretosians' focus on brute strength had blinded them to the true nature of warfare. They had ignored the lessons of history, believing themselves above such tactics, and now they were paying the price. As Zarek's flagship began to lose power, he watched as his once proud fleet fell apart around him. His commanders were panicking, unsure of how to proceed in the face of such unexpected tactics. For the first time in his life, Zarek understood the depth of his failure. The Cretosians had relied on strength, but the humans had used everything at their disposal: intelligence, history, and innovation. What the Cretosians had seen as weakness was, in fact, humanity's greatest strength. The final blow came not in the form of a massive explosion or a devastating weapon but in the quiet realization that the war was already lost. Zarek issued the order for retreat, knowing that staying any longer would only lead to further humiliation and more losses. The Cretosians, once the strongest species in the universe, had been brought to their knees not by superior firepower, but by a species they had underestimated from the beginning. The humans had given them a history lesson that they would not forget, a lesson that wars are not won by strength alone, but by strategy, adaptability, and an understanding of one's enemy. As the Cretosians retreated from Earth, they left behind a planet that had not only survived but had proven itself in ways that even its own inhabitants might not have imagined. The victory was not without cost. Many lives had been lost, and much of Earth lay in ruins, but humanity had triumphed in the face of overwhelming odds. In the aftermath, Earth's leaders reflected on what they had accomplished. They knew that this war, like so many in their history, had not been won through brute force. It had been won through intelligence, patience, and the willingness to adapt. For the Cretosians, the defeat was a humbling experience. They had thought themselves invincible, but they now knew better. They had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, they had lost everything they had sought to gain. As their fleet limped back to their homeworld, they vowed never to underestimate another species again, especially not humans. The Cretosians had come to Earth seeking to prove their dominance, but instead they had learned a harsh truth: sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in muscle or machines, but in the mind. The war had ended, but the impact of humanity's victory would be felt throughout the galaxy for generations. Other species, once fearful of the Cretosians, now looked to humanity as a force to be reckoned with. The humans, who had once seemed so weak in the eyes of the galaxy, had proven themselves to be more than just survivors. They were strategists, innovators, and warriors in their own right. In the end, the Cretosians had wanted a war to prove their superiority. What they had received was far more profound, a history lesson that would echo across the stars for years to come. Humanity had shown them that strength without strategy is meaningless, and that the greatest victories are often won by those who are willing to think beyond brute force. It was a lesson the Cretosians would carry with them forever, a reminder that even the strongest can be brought low by those they least expect.